So today I wanted to talk about staying on top of your expenses, because I have found that if we want to be able to stick to our budgets, one of the most important things that needs to be done is to have a good method for tracking expenses on a regular basis. And I feel like that's not weekly. Like for me, I have found that when I used to track expenses weekly, like after the week was over, once I realized I was over budget, there was nothing I could do because it was already in the past. So I was kind of more adding everything up and then saying, okay, we went over budget. And I would try and look at it and figure out like what caused us to go over budget. And it wasn't usually really, a lot of just kind of like spending on things we shouldn't be spending on. It was usually like, I forgot that I had to purchase those batteries earlier in the week, or maybe we traveled more than usual and spent more money on gas, or maybe I had to pick up a pair of pants for my son for work to start a new job, or all these random things that might happen in your week that you kind of forget about. And I realized that my budget wasn't working because I was recording everything at the end after it had already happened, and then it was too late to really do anything about it at that point. I would be thinking that I was doing great because I would forget about those little things a day or two after they happened. And then by the time, it was time to add everything up, there was all this extra stuff that I had completely forgotten about. And it all added up to too much, so that it wound up making us go over budget. So one thing that I've kind of found to be really helpful in sticking to my expenses and kind of staying on top of them is planning out the week. I have found that when I have a certain budget for like general weekly expenses that covers things like gas and groceries and like whatever of those other like miscellaneous type things that might come up during the week. And I found that if I try to think through the week, like what's specifically coming up this week, and putting down an estimate of what I might need to spend on, I'll have a better idea of how much cushion there might be left in the budget for the week. So like, for example, say if I knew my son was going to be starting a new job and he was going to need a pair of pants or something like that, I would put that down as an estimate and say, okay, well, I'm going to have to buy this. It's not like an item that I would normally budget for, but it's something this week that's kind of particular to this week that I know I'm going to need to spend. So before the week even starts, I would look at what my weekly spending budget is and say, okay, well, I know I'm going to have to spend this. I know we always spend this much money on this pretty much every week. I would figure out how much I thought we were going to spend on gas. Like say, for example, if maybe we had a couple of new events we had to attend, or maybe a birthday party that was a long distance or whatever. Anything like that that's kind of unusual or different than our normal spending, I would estimate how much we were going to spend on those things that are going to be coming up this week. And by doing that, it would help me get a better idea of how much cushion there might be left in the budget for the week. And then I would know if I have to really kind of hold back on anything that isn't really urgent, or if I might have a little wiggle room to pick up things as they're needed. I also do my grocery shopping at the very beginning of my budget week. So that way I am able to record what I spent on groceries. And if I wound up spending more than usual, I could make an adjustment like right then saying, okay, I have spent more on groceries this week, so I need to make sure that I'm really careful on what we spend the rest of the week. It just kind of gives you like a perspective on the upcoming week, on knowing how tight you need to be with the rest of your spending. Or if you maybe spent less on groceries, you could say, okay, well, I could pick up this other thing this week because I saved money on groceries. So planning out your week, I have found really has been helpful to me to kind of stay on track, because it gives me a better idea of what our expenses might look like and how much wiggle room I might have during that week. Another tip I have that really has helped me is recording my expenses every day. Now, I know sometimes there's some days you just don't have time, but if you try as like a general practice to update your budget on a daily basis, it has helped me be so much more successful with staying within the amount of money I want to spend. Because when you record your expenses right after they occur, you won't have the risk of forgetting about those little purchases that you made a few days ago. I could see if I record my expenses right away, I can see if I've already hit my budget earlier in the week, and then that will make me more aware of any additional purchases that I might have to make, knowing that they're going to cause me to go over budget. It doesn't mean that there might not be something that comes up that it's, I just have to buy this item for whatever reason, it's really urgent. But at least I'm aware that that's going to make me go over budget and I'll have to try and make it up somewhere else. But by knowing that, you might decide not to purchase something that you don't really need. You kind of have that information in your mind because you're staying on top of what you've spent so far. It not only kind of helps you keep up on top of your expenses when you're doing it on a daily basis, or at least, maybe every other day. I find that daily, for me at least, has been much more helpful because there are times when I bought something yesterday and I've already forgotten about it by the next day because you're just busy and you're living life, and it's just so easy to forget about those small purchases that you need to make. But not only does it help you keep on top of your expenses, I feel that it's easier to record a few things at a time than have to record like a week's worth of activity all at once. A tip for trying not to let credit card purchases get away from you. So if you're tracking your actual expenses against your budget based on the activity in your checking account, it's also really important to add that extra step of tracking your credit card expenses as they occur, not when the bill comes. And one way that I've found to be helpful in sticking to my budget when it comes to credit card purchases is that I record the purchase against my budget, and then I subtract the amount out of my available checking balance. I don't do this in my actual register, like I use QuickBooks, so I don't record it in my actual checkbook register, but I have a separate spreadsheet, and I will minus out of my available balance whatever amount the purchase was that I need to pay on my credit card. So I basically kind of show the expense, and then I minus out from the available amount whatever the cumulative amount is that I owe to the credit card. So I kind of show it as like a due to whatever credit card it's due to. And then that way, when the bill comes, that amount of cash has already been set aside for all the purchases that I made on the credit card. So it's kind of like as if I spent the cash because I'm kind of deducting that cash from my available balance. But I'm still using the credit card and I'm able to get the rewards that I'm looking to get, which is the reason why I'm using the credit card. So that has really helped me by recording the activity as if that cash is no longer available, because really it isn't. I mean, you don't want to be using a credit card regularly for things that you don't have money in your checking for, because then you can run into the situation where you wind up running a balance on your credit card. So by kind of saying, as you're making those purchases, saying, okay, this money is no longer available for other things, it will help make sure that you have that cash available to pay the bill in full when it comes, and avoid any interest expense that you might end up getting if you don't have the money available. And if you do use credit cards, another tip is to just try and maybe limit yourself to one card if possible. I know sometimes different cards, like if you're trying to get rewards or cash back or things like that, different cards are better for certain purchases than others. But the more cards you use, the easier it is to lose track of purchases until your bill arrives. So if you can try to limit to like one main card, that kind of makes it easier to keep track of your expenses. And I also recommend making sure that you have online access if you don't already, either via the app. Most credit cards have an app and you can quickly check your credit card activity. And then, of course, online access. If you use something like QuickBooks or things like that, you can usually import the activity also right into the software, which makes it a lot easier to record your activity, and you don't have to like type all the data in. You could just kind of import it and then record your expenses, and then you could just do that every time the activity posts to the credit card, like once it's cleared through. I also always check pending activity, because a lot of times a purchase won't be cleared through on the card, but it'll be pending. So I always make sure to check that, because that's another way to just make sure that you haven't forgotten about any purchases that you've made. If you do have to use a different card for a certain store, that's not what you typically use, just always make sure to try and record the purchase as soon as you get home, again, so that you don't forget. Like, for example, I use the Target card to get the 5% back. But I never set up online access for myself and it's not something that I like normally check to record the activity. So if I make a purchase at Target with that card, I make sure to record the purchase as soon as I get home from the store. Otherwise, I'm probably going to forget. And then all of a sudden a Target bill will show up and I'll say, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that I made these purchases. However, in that instance for Target, I know they have a Target debit card that is, you get the same 5%. So I keep meaning to look into that because there's really no reason for me to have to use the credit card at Target, because I'm only using it to get the 5% off. And if I could do the same and have it linked to my checking and just pay like a debit card, that's even easier. So I'm definitely looking into that. I just haven't taken the time to go ahead and make that change. But most importantly, it's just really finding a method that works for you. There's many different options on how to record your expenses. I know a lot of people love some of the budgeting apps that allow you to track your expenses against your budget. I know some of them can be automated, where it syncs up and records your activity against the budget categories. I've never actually used one of those, honestly, so I don't know fully how they work, but I know many people find them really helpful. So if you struggle with taking the time to record your activity, maybe one of those budgeting apps that you can automate would be helpful to you. I track my expenses in a spreadsheet, which I know is a little bit old-fashioned-ish, but I have a method that works and I really like it, so that's what I do. And I just haven't really had the time or energy to try switching to another method, and I don't really feel like it was necessary for me because what I'm doing is working for me, so I've stuck with it. But you just want to decide the best way to track your expenses so that it is most helpful to you. Because like I said, the more you can kind of record them, you know, as current, like as soon as possible, it definitely helps with overspending because you get that information right away instead of always recording it after the fact. And you won't end up accumulating all those purchases that you had forgotten about until you go to record everything and you're like, oh my gosh, where did this all come from? So those are my tips for staying on top of your expenses. I hope maybe something here was helpful to you. And don't forget that you can reach me via email with any questions or suggestions at lolasfrugallife@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at lolasfrugallife. You can find blog posts for each episode on my website at lolasfrugallife.com. You can also join our private listeners group on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/lolasfrugallife. And if you enjoy the show, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen from. And I would love it if you would screenshot the show and tag me on Instagram so that I can see you're listening. Also, if you can take a couple of seconds to rate and review the podcast, that would be really helpful to me. That is one of the metrics that is used to help the show get found by more listeners. So I would really appreciate that. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a really awesome day.